right, so this is part 3 of the Unity and Division teaching, part 3. Today, Unity and Division in the body of Messiah. Now, there's 2 things I want to say first as we start. Number 1 is that there are those that may wonder, well, why do I keep repeating myself, or why are certain things an issue? You know, and there's an old joke that talks about how the rabbi gave a sermon, and it was fabulous, and everybody loved the sermon, and came up to him and told him how good it was. And then they were all excited, came back next week, and wouldn't you know it, he gave the same sermon. But it was still really good, so they didn't really complain about it, and came back the next week, and he gave the same sermon. And now they're starting to kind of be concerned. Maybe there's some Alzheimer's going on or something, because the rabbi gave the same sermon 3 weeks in a row. Now somebody definitely needs to go say something. And so they finally get up the nerve. One of them goes up to him and says, by the way, we really appreciate your message. It's terrific. But we did happen to notice that you gave the same message for the last 3 weeks. He said, aha, that's good. They said, well, what's going on? He says, well, it's real simple. When you guys start doing it, I'll stop saying it. And this unity and division thing is one of those things, because after all, we're reading about it all throughout Scripture. This week's Torah portion was Korach. We see all the fighting and rebellion and things going on there. Wasn't it much earlier when you saw, Aaron and Miriam rebelling against Moses? I mean, this isn't the end of it. We're going to have Pinchas dealing with some stuff here in a little bit. I mean, this thing has not been, it's not something new, but it should have been fixed already. You see Shaul talking about it with his congregations on a regular basis. So yes, we need to start doing this. I mean, I almost feel like we need to be preaching this every week until the dividing and fighting and strife goes away. Because you might just stop fighting and strife just because you're tired of hearing the sermon. Anything to make him stop giving the same message. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there is something about this type of a sermon, and maybe the other ones as well, but this type of a message, where you may think it was about you. You may think that I'm calling you out, or that it was something that happened that you and I know about that other people maybe didn't know, and that somehow I'm calling you out in public or something. You are correct. But you're also not correct. In other words, if you see yourself in the message, you were supposed to, but you're not correct in that I had absolutely nobody in mind when I said anything that I said. Does that make sense? Because guess what? If it was you, in one particular area I was talking about, I could easily have been thinking of 12 or 20 different people with the same problem or same situation. So for you to think it was, there was that song that Carly Simon sang in the 70s, "You're so vain, you probably think this sermon's about you." No, you don't remember that one? Okay, but it is about you. You should be looking in every message for you. What can I take out of this message and grow more Yeshua-like? Grow more prepared for the wedding feast. To be a bride who's made herself ready, right? So I just want to point that out, because sometimes people walk around going, I can't believe he called me out like that. And I did, but I didn't. And that's the important thing. The message called you out. I wasn't thinking about you at all. In other words, specifically you. I didn't have a face or a name in my head, and I may have even looked in your direction when I said something, and I still wasn't thinking about you. I promise you. But that's an important thing to understand with these messages, is that you receive it as from him, not as from me. And it wasn't because of something that we talked about 2 days ago or last week or some other thing that I'm aware of, so how dare I bring it out in front of everybody? Because we can all own that. Okay, because there's going to be something, hopefully, in his word that I say that you own, that it convicts you of something. So let's just have that all in our heads as we go through all of this, that, first of all, even Peter talks about in one of his letters, he says, look, you should already know all these things I'm about to say to you, but it's my job to remind you and stir it up by remembrance on a regular basis. Okay? Because some of you may think, wait a minute, he did this teaching last couple of years or whatever it was. I think it was about 5 years ago I did this teaching, and he's doing it again, and now instead of 1 part, oh man, now it's 3 plus parts now. He's probably not going to finish today either, and I'm not. And so But you guys haven't fixed the problem yet. We're still dealing with this stuff. And so we need to be listening and going through it. So let's go ahead and have a quick review of where we are up to this point. So first of all, we know that it's Yeshua's desire that we are one as he and the Father are one. And so this is so that the world would know that the Father sent the Son. So this is this is Yeshua's main objective, his biggest desire, and that's what the Torah is for, the community living is for. All of these things are to bring together one thing, unity. The unity like the Father has with the Son. That is the purpose of this whole thing. That's what the forever kingdom is going to look like. A whole lot of people who can understand how to be one like the Father and Son are one. We are not there yet. Okay? This was and is to be accomplished while we are in the world, but not of the world. So that was another part of what we read in the first teaching, was that this is to be accomplished while we are in the world, but not of the world. So we were not supposed to be rescued out of here and isolated somewhere where we could just go ahead and make this all work. We're supposed to be doing it in this very challenging place called the world. Okay, Yeshua did all of that. You know, we saw him do it while in the world, right? He came into the world. He lived in the world, but he was not of the world. Now, Yeshua did all this, and he did all that he did so that we, if we imitate him, that we could be set apart as he is set apart. So he did all that he did so that if we would imitate him, we could be like him. We also discovered through Ephesians chapter 4 in the teachings that we need anointed, appointed leadership to help us to become one. Because in Ephesians chapter 4, where it talks about the fivefold as its known ministry, it says that those positions are to be in place and active until we all come into the unity of Messiah. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. We have divisions among us. This is one of the other things that we figured out in the first two parts. We have divisions among us because, you ready for this? We're not of the same mind and same opinion. Well, I think that we can't even have to deal with the mind part. The opinion part is already a big enough problem. I mean, we can't be of the same opinion. By the way, opinion, we're not talking about being of the same mind and opinion on every single detail, but of the goal, of the objective, of the pathway, of the process. That's what we need to be, of one mind and one opinion. And of course, we're told that this is the mind of Messiah that we need to have. Because when we're not of the same mind and same opinion, this gives the world the appearance that Messiah is divided. Right? Shaul said, is Messiah divided? And so we read verses that dealt with those things. We discovered that envy, strife, and division in the body indicates that the body is still fleshly, walking according to me. I'm going to walk according to me. Not according to him, but I'm going to walk according to me. And I think everybody else should walk according to me. That's where the divisions start to come. Because it's not enough that you want to walk according to you, but everybody else should walk according to you as well. Okay? So envy, strife, and division of the body indicates that we are still fleshly. Now, we don't have the time to get into this, but we probably will at some point go through some of Paul's writings where Shaul is talking about the fleshly versus the spirit. And it's not what the Pentecostals and Charismatics have taught you in this sort of ethereal, ooey-gooey thing of the spirit. It's simply a mindset. When you behave, think, and act like the world, that's fleshly. When you behave, think, and act like the Father and the Son, that is spiritual. That's acting in the Spirit. It doesn't have to go into these other, more esoteric ways that some denominations have taken it. It's not complicated like that. He says, when you have envy and strife and division, all these things, are you not fleshly? Because these are the things that the flesh likes and desires. But the things that are above, that are taught from above, are spiritual. They're not ethereal and ooey-gooey. They're simply, when you eat right, that's spiritual. When you eat wrong, that's fleshly. When you keep the holy days, that's spiritual. When you keep the pagan days, that's fleshly. When you just keep going back and forth. It doesn't get into this higher, deeper, realm that you have to understand what's of the Spirit. Walk Torah, that's of the Spirit. Okay, you walk the worldly ways, that's of the flesh. That's always what Shaul is talking about, by the way, and that's what gets everybody so confused. He's simply comparing the two. And so you live in a fleshly world, but you're supposed to not be of that. You're supposed to walk in a spiritual way. And so when the world wants to go A, and the scripture and the Torah tells you to do B, B is the spiritual way, A is the fleshly way. And you have to make your choice between fleshly and spiritual. And we're going to talk about that in some of the verses today. So he was saying, look, that when we have division and strife and envy, are you not still fleshly? These are fleshly things. The Spirit is what? Echad. The Spirit is echad, is one. Everything that walks in the Spirit is walking in a oneness, a unity. Yahweh sees one's causing strife among brothers as an abomination. We talked about that in the first couple of parts. That was in Proverbs 6, I think verse 19, okay, where it says the 6 things Yahweh hates, the 7th is an abomination. We also learned that every reign or kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. So why is it that we think, let me start again. Why is it that we're surprised when congregations fall apart? Because they are houses divided against themselves. There's division in those places. Why is it that the body looks like it jumped on a landmine? Because the house is divided against itself. It's going to be laid waste and it's not going to work. It can't stand. So we were taught that in the teaching up to this point. And then we talked about some paradigm shifts. And the last one we talked about was the shift from babe to mature adult. From young, like suckling who needs the milk, to being a full-grown adult sitting at the table eating meat. That's the place that we keep getting stuck. We think we're adults, but we're there choking on the milk. And the reason is, why? Because to do so, you need to now switch from fleshly to spiritual. That's essentially the problem. So then we talked about maturity issues, and we talked about, are you becoming the type of person that Yahweh would spend eternity with? Well, he wants to spend eternity with those that are like the Son, are at one with him completely, that are in complete unity with him. That's who the Father wants to spend forever with. And we decided that what that person looks like that the Father would want to spend forever with would be the Son. And the Son demonstrates that that looks like one who is completely submissive to the authority of the Father, which is Torah observance, as well as walks in the fruit of the Spirit of Galatians 5:22, which I want to read here in a second. But some of you may not. We're going to have to do some things now. I know we've done these before, and some of you enjoy it. Some of you might be bored by it, but we want to do it again for this recording. Some of you may not be understanding the criticalness of this, are you becoming the type of person thing. And the way I play the game is I say, look, what if I gave you, any one of you, and just go through the exercise again, those who've heard this 10 times. What if I gave you that authority to live forever and choose who you would spend forever with? Would you not have to decide what kind of criteria or measuring stick you would use to decide who gets in and who doesn't get in? Aren't you going to have to think about what type of person you're looking for to want to spend? Because forever is a long time. It's the longest time there is. It's no time. It's just forever. So will you think about all the people you know right now on the planet, the people that you're related to, that you work with, that you interact with on a regular basis. Would you want to live with all of them forever? See, I think if we all don't change at all and then end up in the forever, that doesn't sound like heaven, that sounds like hell. We're already miserable now with all that. Why would we want to do that forever? You know, it's come as you are, but please don't stay that way. We're supposed to be changing, conforming, and transforming into the image of the Son. The more we do that, the more that we'll be happier with each other. But the more we decide to be stubbornly self-sovereign, not going to work. It's not going to work. So then my thought is, how many people right now would be on your list? Be a pretty small list, I think, for most of us that we'd actually feel comfortable spending forever with. Think about it. Think about the people you thought you were real comfortable with in your life that you no longer even talk to because it turned out you didn't really actually do as well with them as you thought. Friends you no longer have. Family members you don't talk to or don't talk to you. We think that we were really close with these people at one point and then came to find out we were not echad. We were not of one mind or one opinion. We weren't focused correctly together as one. So here's a scarier thought. How many people's lists do you think you'd be on? I mean, it's one thing to start thinking about it from the point of view, okay, well, you're not on my list. You can forget about you. But what about when people look at you and they've got their list? Are you on their list? Or are you one of the ones that looked at like, no way. Forget about that. Not happening. Okay? Well, guess what? That's what this is all about, is Yahweh's going to sit down with you and stop thinking about it as the judgment seat where he's going to take and hold you up against like a test in an exam. Did you pass the test? No, he's going to sit down with you. I'm thinking more like a casual situation like in a living room with a couch or whatever, and sit there and go, you know what? I think I'd like to spend forever with you. I've seen your whole life. I've seen every decision you made. I know where your heart is at. I know how you think. Yeah, I think I'd like to spend forever with you. Because that's what this life test is really about. Not whether or not you kept the Sabbath perfect and he wants you to want to. He wants you to try to. That's the Deuteronomy 8:2. We're going to talk about that today as well. He wants it to be in your heart to keep the commandments and to want to do them perfectly, but not doing it perfectly is not going to get you booted out. Doing it carelessly might, because your heart wasn't right. If you took it too lightly, you didn't try hard. But it's going to be about, how would I feel spending forever with you? Would I enjoy it? Because there are probably a bunch of people out there that keep certain commandments absolutely perfectly, but I don't think we'd enjoy spending 5 minutes together because it didn't work on the other half of it, which is the fruit of the Spirit. See, part of it is the technical part. Did you have a heart to be obedient? The other part is, are you a miserable human being who nobody likes to be around? Because let's face it, you can be an obnoxious jerk and keep all the commandments perfectly. You can. You do not have to have any kind of personality to eat kosher or show up on Shabbat or to not steal or not murder or to not covet or commit adultery or not make an... You can still be a miserable human being and do all those things correctly. Tithe correctly. You know, all of the, whatever it is, go through all the 613, you can do them all. None of those commandments require you to be nice. They don't. Polite, respectful, fun to be around. None of those commandments require any of that stuff. But that's why Yeshua said to love your neighbor as yourself is just as important as keeping the commandments. Now, it wasn't a new instruction, because we have that also in Leviticus and other places in the Tanakh where it says to love your neighbor as yourself. But he's saying that sometimes people get focused on the one and they forget that the other one is just as important. This is why he says things like, yes, you tithe on even the little leaves of the herbs, the mint and the anise, etc. But what about the mercy and the compassion and the other personality things that would make you a person someone would want to spend forever with? You know, some of us help our children with this when they're younger, thinking, and we teach them and we say, you know what, if you don't change, nobody's ever going to want to marry you. You're not going to have any friends because right now you're a miserable person. Who would want to be with that person? And so this is all part of the unity and division part of the puzzle here. Is to understand that if we're going to become the type of person that Yahweh wants to live with forever, now if you are the type of person, you're not going to cause division because you're not going to have envy. You're not going to be having any strife with anybody. You're not going to feel like, well, that's not fair and this and that. You're going to simply say, I accept your will, Abba, and I know that whatever's happening, that's the idea of emunah. I have full trust, faith, and belief that in my emunah, that what you're doing is the right thing. And it was supposed to happen because there's a purpose to it. See, if Korach could have had that mindset, he would never have rebelled. But some of us end up with a Korach mindset, not a Yeshua mindset at times. Well, how come she gets to do that? Or how come he has that? Well, that's not fair. That's not right. That blah, 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 blah. And this is where we're at. Let's go to Galatians 5 and read about this for a second. In Galatians 5:22, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit. So it says, but the fruit of the Spirit, because he previously said, look, let's go up to Verse 16 says, I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. Now, people will read that and go, oh, the Spirit. Now, I've got to be spiritually high-minded of something. No, do the things that are above. If you're walking and keeping Torah, you don't walk and keep the fleshly things. It's not complicated. He says, because this is what the flesh looks like. The flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. They're opposed to each other. So you do not do what you desire to do. Excuse me. But if you are led by Spirit, you are not under Torah, meaning you're not under the penalties of Torah because you're submitted to Torah. So you're not under that. But also earlier, there's a lot of comparisons here and in other of his writings where it talks about there's the law of sin and death in our bodies as compared to the law of life. But now look what he goes into. He says, look, the works of the flesh, and I was going to compare the two, are well known. Which are these? Adultery, whorings, uncleanness, indecency, idolatry, drug sorcery, hatred, quarrels. Hey, look, some of you might be thinking, yeah, I'm not hating, and there's no drugs, and no idolatry, no whoring. And, oh, wait a minute, but do you quarrel? I think we all quarrel at times. Do you have jealousies? Some of us struggle with fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions. What are selfish ambitions? Like the person who comes in and says something like, well, you know, I should be a teacher. Nobody's ever put me up there. I should be an elder. I should be a deacon. I should be whatever. That's an ambition because it's the I part. I. Okay? There are ladies, especially ladies, I don't want to pick on you, but ladies, some of you will come in and say, well, I want to teach. I want to lead. I want this. Well, it's irrelevant where my position is on whether or not you should or not. It's the I part. If Abba wants you to do something, he'll open the door for you to do it. It's when you start going and imposing yourself saying, but how come you're not letting me, but I want to do this. Ladies do that a lot too. Men, everybody's not exempt from this. Because we'll have people come into our ministry, and that's one of the first things they start saying is, well, where do I fit in all this? I said, well, sit back and wait and see where Abba puts you. Don't try to figure out where to put yourself. Let him put you somewhere. That's for men and ladies. But let's be careful of the I, okay? When it says here, selfish ambitions. Nothing wrong with ambitions. He said, selfish ambitions. Where do the selfish ambitions come from? You seeing yourself in a position that nobody's opened the door for yet, or seems to have been blocked. Instead of asking yourself, well, why has that been blocked? Maybe because you're not supposed to have the position, or maybe you're really not ready for it even though you think you are. There may be lots of reasons, but selfish ambition is when you have ambition and all you're doing is focusing on you. And then you get upset, angry, and bitter, and dissension starts, and faction start because somebody didn't allow for you and enable you to have your ambition. Are we hearing this and receiving that? And that's where this can come from. And that's why we have people all over YouTube and Facebook all teaching, and a lot of them have no business doing it, but they're doing it because it's a selfish ambition. They're doing it because they either A, want to see themselves in the position, or B, they want everybody to be on the same page as them, and the only way to get them there is if they teach it. So either way, it's a selfish motive instead of teaching, because that's what you're actually called to do. And if you are called to do it, then you would go get discipled and get trained so that you can do it, so you can learn how to do it, and you can have a covering while you're doing it. So these are the fleshly things. Okay, envies, murders, drunkenness, wild parties, and the like, of which I forewarn you, and said before that those who practice such of these shall not inherit the kingdom. Shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. However, there's the fruit of the Spirit. So now we're comparing the Spirit with the fleshly. And you're going to see in reading the fruit of the Spirit, this requires years of study and being like, a monk up in the mountains. See, it's not that kind of thing. It's very simple stuff, isn't it? He says the spiritual stuff is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no Torah. There is no Torah against these things. So let's listen to this again. Love, joy, peace, patience, etc. It's not talking about just when everything is wonderful. Because most of us, we have a few of us that were weaned on a pickle. That's different. You walk around, all sour-faced, okay? But most of us have these things when life is going well, right? You're joyful, you're love, patient, peace, kind, everything's great. But see, we want to do it from the Spirit side. What is the fruit of the Spirit? Well, Yeshua says to love your enemy. Oh, that's different. That isn't natural. See, it's natural to love someone when everything's great and they love you and you're happy with them and they're happy with you and all that kind of stuff. But what about if that person now is your enemy? Can you still love them? Joy. James, Yaakov says, have joy in your various trials. That takes a different level. That takes a spirit, not fleshly level. See, even the fleshly folks can have love, joy, peace, patience, etc. at times in a fleshly way. Because I've had people tell me, I'm joyful, I have love. Yes, when everything's great, you have all those things. Do you have peace and patience when all chaos is breaking out around you? No, do you lose your mind, pop your cork, and just go crazy? Most of us do. Can I watch all of you when all of a sudden you're running late to somewhere and you catch an accident in a traffic jam and sit in your car next to you and hear what comes out of your mouth and see your disposition? Are you patient? Do you have peace? Or do you allow these things to steal it? I'm guilty. All of us are guilty at times. This takes the fruit of the Spirit to have this all the time. I talk to people often about their, we'll call them their Torah observance division issues, like the calendar or the nature of the Godhead or how we keep the Sabbath or whatever it is, or tithing. People split over all kinds of things. My point has always been, though, if you cannot speak about that subject and still maintain your fruit of the Spirit, then you're already wrong. In other words, if you're speaking about it and you're not kind to the person you're speaking, you're not patient with the person you're speaking, you're not being gentle with the person you're speaking to. If the person's not interested and you still push, then you're breaking the peace part of that because you're disturbing the other person's peace. And so we have this in our guidelines booklet for our feast when we do Sukkot, when we do unleavened bread, etc., that says if there's a topic that you cannot maintain the fruit of the Spirit in, you are asked to not speak about it during the feast. Oh, you're telling me I can't talk about? No, I'm not telling you can't talk about anything unless it's something you can't maintain this. And you know what? Since I started using that in the guidelines, I don't think I've heard too many calendar debates at a feast. Or arguments about the nature of Yeshua and the Godhead. Or arguments, I haven't heard most of the things that we fight about, I haven't heard anybody talk about. Why? Because they realize two things. One is, I'm not mature enough to do it. And two is, there's a lot of other things we could talk about. Things we agree about. Because there's only 4 or 5 things we argue about. There's not 100 of them. And so this fruit of the Spirit thing. Now notice what it says here at the rest of it. It says in verse 24, and those who are of Messiah have impaled the flesh with its passions and desires. Now what did we talk about last week also? Emotions are a tool we can use to measure our level of maturity. See, our passions, if not in a mature way handled, lead us into these problems. See, it's nothing wrong with passion. You could be extremely passionate, and you should be. But if your passions are leading you instead of you being in control of your passions, then you can end up in all these fleshly places. You should be very passionate about everything Abba's doing. But that's something you can consciously control and be aware of that you can be passionate about. But it's when your passions are stirred up, that's where we get very angry or very jealous or very, you can lust after things that are not just flesh. Like people, you could be lusting after information, after whatever, food, there's a million things you could be lusting after. Your passions are stirred up. We talk about crimes of passion. So that goes back to the emotions. If your emotions are under control, meaning that you only let them flow in fullness when you are in control of that. You can allow yourself to just explode with laughter or explode with tears of joy or to just be overflowing with, but you're not out of control. You see? But when your emotions, you know what that looks like, the emotions? When your emotions are like, I want to go there because I like the way it felt. That's an emotional thought. We have a lot of people that will leave the Messianic Hebrew roots, whatever we label ourselves, to run back into their charismatic churches because it made them feel good. It was more fun. It stirred up their emotions than maybe the place you go now, which is less charismatic. And I don't mean from a denomination, just it's less charismatic. People are not as effusive. I don't know if the word makes sense. Okay, they're more explosive in their emotions. Okay? More expressive. All right, so maybe people are a little bit more restrained and laid back. Not because we're restraining them. It just so happens people might be a little bit more restrained. And you miss the explosive, emotional stuff. Because you know why? It's addictive. It's addictive. But he's saying here, look, those who are of Messiah have impaled the flesh with its passions and the desires. So the flesh's passions need to be impaled, killed, done. But that doesn't mean you don't have any more passion. Just like when he said, I want you to have joy, like so my joy can be complete, so you'd have joy like mine, doesn't mean there's no more joy. Just like he said, I didn't come to destroy, to fulfill, doesn't mean there's no more Torah. He's not saying here there should be no more passion. You should be incredibly passionate. Shaul is an incredibly passionate guy. He is very zealous. But notice how his zealousness expressed itself. It started out killing the believers. That was a wrongly directed passion. Okay? There are those, it says in Scripture, because of their passion for Elohim, will turn you in to be killed. So that's a passion that's not in the right place. So we have to be very careful when our emotions are involved. And so how our emotions are running in our lives, and if they're running amuck, we have a problem. That is a measure of our maturity. And almost all of the division, strife, quarreling comes from passions that are running amok. We get upset, we get angry. I remember being a guest, and I was probably right around the time I first taught this teaching. I was a guest at a Sukkot to speak, and right away we were meeting before we were having dinner before the actual meeting was going to be after dinner. And we were sitting around some campfires, and people were cooking and making the food and everything. It was more of a campground type of place for a feast. And sitting on the other side of the fire, probably a good 20 feet from me, I couldn't even really see the person that well, I heard a voice yell out, "So, where do you stand on this calendar thing?" Because after all, one of the emotional things is they want to know if the teacher, speaker, agrees with them so they can walk around going, "Hey, he agreed with me." So my answer he didn't like, which is what I said. I said, well, listen, I think all of you on all sides of this thing are wrong. And I explained because of this part here, because none of you were able to maintain your shalom and your fruit of the Spirit. This person got angry and could not and jumped out of his chair and started yelling at me from across the fire. Do you see what was the problem? Passions that were not under control, that were not properly directed. Okay, nothing wrong with passion, but his were not directed correctly. So just my not agreeing with him got him to literally jump out of a chair and start yelling at me across a fire in front of a bunch of people. Could you imagine? Okay? Because the emotions are leading instead of being led. So instead of you being in control and allowing the emotions to flow correctly, the emotion is leading. And so what happens is, and in these divisions here, and again, this wasn't really part of what I was going to say today, but we're going to go through it anyway, is we become emotionally invested in the idea or in the concept, and that's why we get angry. Because now that we've emotionally invested ourselves, not agreeing with me means you're not agreeing with me. Now you're rejecting me, you see? Instead of not agreeing with what I said, now you're not agreeing with me. Now it's personal. You're rejecting and arguing against me because I've now emotionally bonded with this thing, with this idea, with this behavior, with whatever it is. I've bonded with it. So now it and me, whatever the item is, we're not separable. Now we're completely connected. You see how that could be the problem? All right? And so once you've emotionally bonded, now you really are setting yourself up for a potential problem. Okay, so that's why people get so upset. Because now they take it as a personal attack or personal rejection. Think about the people in your family that get really angry when you no longer are doing the things that they're doing. Well, they're personally bonded to that life, that Christian life, that worldly life, whatever it was that you're no longer doing, so that they've bonded with Christmas. And now you tell them, I'm not going to be doing Christmas. Now, how do they react? Oh, you're judging me, you're attacking me. No, I am not doing this concept called Christmas that you are embracing. It has nothing to do with you. It's Christmas that I don't want to do. But you're taking it personally because you have identified yourself with the thing you're doing. Okay? You can have it the other way around too. Somebody may be breaking Shabbat, you're keeping Shabbat, and you get all angry about it. Why? They're not hurting Shabbat by not doing it any more than you're helping Shabbat by doing it. You're helping you by doing it, and they're hurting themselves by not doing it. Why are you upset about it? Why do you get all angry and take it personally? Because somehow you've bonded with it and taken it as your own personal thing that you're now somehow responsible for in some way. That's where divisions start to come, the envy. Is this making any sense? Okay? I feel like I do a lot of counseling these days trying to help people understand the psychology of how our actual mind is working. What is making us do the things we do and not do the things we should be doing? And this is part of it I'm trying to get through to you guys so you understand. Because that's what's going on through here when he says that you have to impale the flesh with its passions. Those who are of Messiah don't do that. He said, if we are to live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Let's look at this last piece here. If we're going to live in the Spirit, so what you do is, if you're living in the fruit of the Spirit here, while also residing in the world. You physically reside in the world, but you can actually walk while you're in the world. You can walk not in the world, but you can walk in the Spirit. So how is that? You're walking by keeping Torah, and your love, joy, peace, patience, etc., while you're doing it. So now you're walking in the Spirit. So he's saying if we're going to live in the Spirit, and like we'll call it a little spirit bubble. You're in the world, but you're living in a spirit bubble where you walk a certain way. Your halakha, your walk, is Torah observance in the context of these things here called the fruit of the Spirit. He says, so if you're going to live in that place, in other words, that's where you're claiming you're going to live. You're going to live in a spirit place. That place is Torah observance and walking with these things. Then you need to walk in it. So let us not become conceited, provoking one another. So now that's another part of this. He says now that we're out of the other part of this, which is the coming out of the world, out of the fleshly desires, don't be all pumped up about it like I'm all puffed up. And don't be looking down at everybody else. Don't provoke people like, what's wrong with you? Don't you know? This is what happens every time we come to Christmas and Easter. Oh, you people will mock all the people on Facebook who are doing the other things. Why? What makes you so smart and so special? Because he called you? What did you do to deserve that? To earn that? He called you because he had something in mind to call you. And he didn't call them at this point, not because they're worse than you or better than you or anything than you. It's just his timing and his thing. Why mock them? You were, not too long ago, you were them. And that's a big problem when we end up getting, so what do? We end up getting conceited. And then we start provoking each other. By the way, it's not just the world. The body, this is where we have the division of the body. Oh, I'm here, I'm studying, I'm at home, and I'm studying, or I'm listening to somebody teach, and light bulbs are going on. I figured out the calendar. Now I'm all full of myself, and I need to make sure everybody else knows I figured it out. And if they don't get it, I'm going to keep provoking them until they get it. I'm going to send them an email with 57 attachments to show them how stupid they are and how smart I am, even though they didn't ask for it. And I'm only using that analogy because I get those emails. Please don't send anybody anything they've not asked for. Don't send YouTube videos. Don't send written teachings. We're going to have to compete with the rain here. Don't send anything that has not been requested. So what you can do is say to somebody, I have something I'd like you to see or watch or read. Would it be okay if I send it to you? Is that fair? That's what I would do. I would ask them and say, I have something, because I'll tell you right now, when you send me that stuff, unless something about it was totally compelling, I'm probably not going to look at it. I don't have the time, and I didn't agree to it, and so just out of protocol, I'm not going to do it, because it's rude and it's wrong. Okay, not because I disagree with the person, it's just rude and it's wrong. And then people will get mad at me. I've had people send me attachments or videos, and the same day, 3 hours later, get upset that I haven't responded yet to what they sent me. I said, I probably didn't even see your email yet. I only get 600 a day or whatever it is. But there are people that actually get mad that we haven't responded the same day they sent it. This is because we become conceited. We start getting full of ourselves, thinking we know better and we have to fix everybody else. You want to fix everybody else? Get a microphone, make a teaching, and put it out there for public consumption, and whoever needs it will find it. Does that make sense? You don't need to do it one-on-one. If you have a thing to say, because I love when people correct me, and I'll say to them, where's your teaching on this? Oh, I don't have one. Okay, well, I'll wait for that. But I'm not a teacher. Oh, then what makes you feel you're qualified to correct a teacher? it's not because I'm an egomaniac and full of conceit either. It's just about respect. If you are a teacher and have something that you want to teach that's different than what other people understand, then teach it. Okay? Many of you have heard my teaching on grace. If you haven't, you ought to listen to it, called The Search for the Doctrine of Grace. I have never sat down and shared that teaching one-on-one with anybody thinking I need to straighten them out on grace. I put that teaching out in public. And by the way, if somebody talks to me about things that have to do with grace that I think they need to understand, I say, by the way, there's a teaching available if you want to listen to it. That's all. But I'm not going to sit there and think I have to convince them of my position on grace. It's not, that would be conceit on my part. Okay? So let's understand that that's where the division comes from, the splitting, the dissension, the arguing, the fighting, because we become conceited and we provoke one another and we envy one another. See the consistency here in Galatians is the same thing that we were reading in other parts of Paul's writings and John when Yeshua was speaking, how this problem with division is all coming from the same place. It's the flesh versus the spirit. And hopefully I've redefined the spirit thing for you enough so that we all are talking the same talk now, and we're walking in the same mind and the same opinion on at least understanding what the spirit is. Now, that being said, we did talk about this a little bit, but I want to talk about it more. The idea is that we have to become selfless, right? Because the conceit is not possible if you're selfless. Only a selfish person, a person who still thinks about self. You may think of yourself as very generous, and you may really be a very generous person. You give the shirt off your back. There's nothing you wouldn't do for people. But there still may be areas of your life where you are focused more on you than on other people. That's the selfish part. So we don't always think of selfish as being much more all-encompassing the areas it can come up in. We think of it more like, if I have something and you want it, I wouldn't share it with you. Well, that's selfish. You won't share it with me. But you know what? If you put you above everything else, that's self-focused, that's selfish. Okay, that's selfish. It's about self. So let's look again at what a selfless person is like, and I've talked about this in the teaching called Developing the Character of Yeshua, but I want to repeat this here. A selfless person Selfless, not selfish, selfless person cannot, in big bold letters, cannot be offended. So don't think you're selfless if you're still possible for you to be offended by something. That you are not over the selfish issues. There's still any area in your life where you may still be offended means that you have too much self still in that area. A totally selfless person cannot be offended. Because you know what gets offended? You. If there's no you to get offended, you can't be offended. You got to get you out of the mix. Because that's what gets offended. You. Okay? A selfless person takes nothing personally. That's why you get offended, because you took it personally. I want to say something, and it may not make any sense. I've said this to people when I've counseled them, and it didn't make any sense to them. It doesn't matter how personal something feels. It doesn't matter how much it was directed right at you. It still wasn't personal. But they were saying it right to my face, and my name was in it, and they called me names. Still not personal. They're venting something that's personal to them. You don't have to receive it. Was it personal to Yeshua when they spit on him, scourged him, and mocked him? Did he take it personally? But what they did to him, wasn't it very personal? Easily to be considered personal? And so we have to understand that when we're going through this. Okay? I think the more important this message is, the more Hasatan is trying to make it rain so that it's hard to hear me. But I'm not going to take it personally. And I'm not going to be offended. So we get offended because we take things personally. Nothing, this doesn't make sense, I know. Nothing that ever happens to you is personal. Okay? Now, it may be that you were supposed to react to it, learn from it in a certain way because Abba allowed it to happen, and that part is personal. But nothing that happens to you or around you are you supposed to take personally in terms of offense. If the other person is spewing all kinds of stuff at you, it's their problem, not yours. Now, you may want to sit back and say, what did I do to create an opportunity for this person to do all of that? And that might be something you can now personally look into. But you're not offended. You're realizing, wow, maybe I contributed to whatever just happened here, and I should look into that. But you're not taking it personally. Very important. The selfless person does not need, now this is, you ready for this? Does not need, there's the key word, need to be right. Selfless person does not need to be right. Does not need to convince others that he or she is right. If you're selfless, you can make a point. You can make a strong case for your point. And if the other person doesn't agree with you or ends up showing you that you were wrong, it's okay. You don't need to be right. You know, we haven't talked about this yet in this teaching, but we need to. Because it's critical to our understanding of what the problem is that we have a horrible needs-wants disconnect. And I've taught this a lot, but it needs to be said again and again and again. We have a terrible needs-wants disconnect. I think we might even have an in focus already on this. I don't know. If we don't, we will. But that's our problem more than anything else, is that we perceive things that we desire or want as a need, and that makes a huge, huge, huge trap for us to fall in. What am I talking about? A need must be met. If you need something, you will do whatever has to happen to get it because you need it. All right? If I were to come over to you and put my hand over your mouth and nose so that you could not breathe, you might think that was funny for a second or two. But at some point, you're going to need to breathe. You're going to kick me, punch me, elbow me, maybe try to bite my hand, anything, scratch me, gouge me. It doesn't matter. You need to breathe. But what happens is we want things, but we think of them as needs. See, you don't need me to agree with you, but you want me to. Everybody wants everybody to agree with them. But what if you needed me to? Now aren't you going to do the same thing as like needing to breathe? Aren't you going to fight, push, badger, provoke until because you will keep relentlessly pushing on me till I finally give in and agree with you. This is what little children do, right? They need that toy. They need that ice cream. They don't understand wants versus needs, and they're going to push and push until they get it, or until you make them clearly understand that it's only a want and not a need. That they understand, as your parent, I'm going to give you everything you need, but I'm absolutely not going to give you everything you want. I'll give you some of the things you want, but I'm not giving you everything you want, because not everything you want is actually good for you. Or maybe the timing isn't good for you. But this is the problem in the body, though. The body doesn't understand the difference between a want and a need. And so what happens is, when they start treating wants as needs, we have terrible problems. We had a problem in this congregation years ago because there were some people that needed me to have a certain position on something that I refused to have. Now, it didn't matter to them that I allowed them the space to do what they wanted themselves. I just wasn't going to take the position publicly. And that became a split in the congregation because it was a need for that person where it wasn't just a want. Okay? I don't need to even tell you what the issue was. It doesn't matter. It could be in any issue. But that person needed me to do something. Even though I had allowed, I said, I don't have any problem with you doing whatever it was. Do it. Fine. I allowed them the space to walk out their own salvation and do it. I said, but that doesn't go in line with what I believe, and I'm not going to teach that from the microphone. But that person needed me not only to agree with them, but to publicly agree with them. And so that became a point that created actually an angry outburst on live stream during the Q&A. And then the person was all mad at me that they embarrassed themselves in front of everybody on the live stream. I said, I didn't make you do anything. You chose to grab the microphone and explode on the live stream. This is many years ago, okay? And so, but yet now the person feels terrible and they're all offended. Now they want to blame me for that too. Isn't that what we do with people? So even when we do things, we can't possibly own that. Now we got to blame somebody else again. This is what causes division. Part of what causes division is you're not owning your own stuff. You want everybody else to own their own stuff, but you don't want to own your own stuff. Your own flaws, your own issues, your own problems. You don't want to own it, but you want everybody around you to own theirs. We're not mature enough. This is a maturity problem. So a selfless person does not need to be right or convince others that he or she is right. A selfless person esteems others above himself and puts others' needs above his own. Notice you're putting others' needs, not wants. You're putting others' needs above your own. A selfless person does not need things to be their way. You know, we talked about this in one of the other parts. I think we talked about it in this teaching in one of the parts, that you get to that point where you take ownership of the congregation. We talked about that, I think, in the last couple of weeks. But there's a point in a relationship, in any relationship, husband, wife, an employee at an office, okay, a congregation member with the congregation leadership, where you have decided that this space is now your space. In other words, this is my company now that I work at. I'm not just a job where I go, this is now my company. I'm connecting and relating to this company. I work here now. This is my company. This is my congregation. I'm not just attending anymore. It's my congregation. This is my wife. This is my husband. Not just the one I'm trying to win over, and we're married now. And so when you take ownership, you know what happens? You start needing things to be your way. Now I need you to change and adapt and adjust to the way I would rather things be. Because I really don't like the way you set the table, or you leave the cap off the toothpaste, or you prefer to, whatever it is. Now, you can ask my wife and test me on this, but one of the ways that we got started to make things work is that she started off moving into my place when we got married and started asking me about things she wanted to change in the place. And I said to her, and you can ask her, I said, you can throw out, change, or remove anything here except me. Okay? Because I was putting her needs, wants above my own. I said, you can throw out, remove, rearrange anything except me. Okay? You can choose to do that. Or you can say, you know what? Let's talk about and negotiate. This will be the way you want it. This will be the way I want it. That's okay too. You don't have to give in like I did and say everything can be yours. I just chose in my relationship to realize I really don't have too many things that really have to be any particular way. I'm not emotionally bonded to the way the living room is set up and where the chair and the couch go. I'm not emotionally bonded to what time we eat or don't eat. Whatever thing that you can be bonded to and get all upset about. I'm not emotionally bonded to these things. That's not to say I don't have things I'm emotionally bonded to. I'm not perfect. I'm still growing. But you have to look in your life and say, what things and what areas are you still self-focused, selfish, and not selfless? There are going to be areas where you're still offended. There are going to be areas where you're still taking things personally. There are going to be areas where you need to be right. There are going to be areas where you're not putting others above yourself. And there are going to be areas where you need things your way. You want things that it has to be your way or you're miserable. Ladies, men too, but ladies, I want to say to you guys first and then to the men. You know, one of the things we say in our marriage vows and we talk about in Scripture is the word submission. And men, this is the same thing for you. If you come under leadership, submission is part of your life too. It is not submitting if you agree with me or you agree with your husband. That is not submission. Submission doesn't come into play until you don't agree, but you do it anyway with the right attitude. Doing it with a nasty attitude and belligerent and upset and thunderclouds, that's not submission. Okay? Abba wants us to submit to him, and we practice that with each other. And you know what? When you're selfish, you can't submit because you need things to be your way. You can't put others above yourselves, blah, blah, blah. Keep filling in the blanks. You can't. You can't submit. So when I talk to husbands and wives, and the wife says, you know, the husband says, well, she won't submit. And she goes, I submit all the time. And it comes to turn out that she thought every time he said something and she agreed with it and did it, she was submitting. That's not submission. Okay? Think of something from a wrestling point of view, like in a, you know, or in any kind of fighting where there's a thing called a submission hold. That's when I grab you in a position that you can't get out of and I force you to say, I quit. You don't want to quit, but I'm forcing you to do something you don't want to do. You must submit. That's submission. You're doing something you'd rather not do. It's not your choice. It's not your decision. It's not the way you would have it be, but yet you have to just say, you have to let go and say, you win. It's your way. I submit. But you can't do that unless you're selfless. You just can't. So choose your battles wisely. Maybe there's things that you need to stand up, and that's good, and we might have to have a counseling session with a husband and wife to work out things that do need to be worked on. But don't claim you're submitting, and this goes to the men too, because guess what? All of us need to learn how to submit. And so if you're in a congregational setting or if you're an employee at a company, there's an authority somewhere. That authority needs to be practiced in that submission thing. You have to practice submitting. So when the boss says to do something that you don't agree with, you don't go back to the other, the main room, whatever, and grab everybody around you and start beating up the boss and what an idiot he is because he's doing it his way instead of your way. Would you say to the boss is, yep, we'll do it your way. I'll give it a 100% shot. And then you hope and sit there going, look, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, maybe the boss will realize it and make an adjustment. If it doesn't work, though, guess whose fault it is? His, not yours. But what if you push and push and push and then your way ends up being wrong? How do you own that? Usually on the unemployment line. That's how you own that. Or you push and push and push and you get fired just because you push and push and push too much. Who wants a relationship like that? By the way, spouses, that's why husbands and wives fight a lot too. You push and push and push and then wonder why you don't have a good relationship with your spouse. It doesn't matter which one of you is doing the pushing all the time. You know, people can call it nagging. You call it whatever you want. But you can do that in a congregation too. The body does this to the rest of the body. All relationships are relationships. And how you treat one, you probably also treat others. So whatever relationship you're not very good at, you're probably also not good at other relationships in similar ways. And what does that cause? Division in whatever relationship you're in. The tools that work for unity work in all relationships. The things that cause division in all relationships. Does that make sense? So it's very important that we covered this today. Wow. I didn't get to anything I was going to get to today. All right. So let's cover something else here. I was going to go to James 1, but we're not going to get to that today. Let's cover that's fine. Let's cover this other piece of this. So we're talking about selfless versus selfish. We're talking about the flesh versus the spirit. We're talking about the concepts, the mindsets, becoming the type of person Yahweh wants to live with forever. And so we're talking about conceit, being puffed up and provoking. So there's one more piece of this that I want to bring out, and it's a game we play called Have You Ever Been Wrong Game. You've all played this with me before. If you haven't, you'll enjoy it anyway. If you have, you'll still enjoy it. It's fun. All of us need a reality check. And the reality check is that we've been wrong and we're likely to be wrong again, and we just don't see it coming. So here's how the game works. And we all can raise our hands. Well, first of all, how many of you don't like to raise your hand? Okay, good. None of you raised your hand. One of you did. Okay. I caught you all. Okay. If you don't like to raise your hand, raise your hand. All right. So how many of you have ever, I know this is a tough one. By the way, you didn't have to study for this test. You should be easy test. How many of you have ever been wrong? Okay, everybody. All right. Now, at the time that you were wrong, have you ever been wrong about something that there was no way you could see it coming? I mean, you knew that you knew. I mean, you were ready to bet the house on it. You ruined a relationship. I mean, you knew you were right. How many of you had that happen and still were wrong? Everybody. Okay. So when that happened, you couldn't see it coming, could you? There's no way. You couldn't see it. You knew that you knew, and you were still wrong. And you're probably still embarrassed about it, and you probably still won't admit it to the person that you were wrong about. Because we can't. Why? Because we're bonded to the idea, right? We got emotionally bonded. Passion. There was too much passion in it. Okay. So that being said, what are the odds, what is the likelihood that that will ever happen again in your life? 100%? Everybody agree? Okay? 100% chance that that might happen again in your life. That you might be emotionally so correct and so sure and still wrong. All right. I mean, any chance that when Yeshua gets here and sets it all straight, that there'll be at least one thing that you go, really? Any shot at that? Well, you're going to go, or well, let's make it worse than that. Instead of you going, really, you're going, no, I killed my friend about that. I killed my wife about that. You beat people up about that. Now you're going to find out you were wrong. Now you're going to feel horrible. You're going to feel horrible. But you know what? You dug yourself such a deep hole, it's hard to get out of it and admit you were wrong. And now, because there's no way to save face now. And by the way, that's another thing that you need to stop doing. A selfless person doesn't need to save face. There's no face to save. Because it's the self that's trying to be protected. The ego, the pride, the me. So you don't have to worry about saving face. You sit there very openly and humbly go, I'm really sorry I was wrong. You were absolutely right. I apologize for beating you up about it. And I deserve all the embarrassment that goes along with it. I am ashamed, and I should be ashamed of making such a big stink, and I was wrong. Own it. Okay, own it. Don't be so embarrassed. Own it. But here's the thing. If you were wrong and never made a big deal about it, it's not very embarrassing to find out you were wrong. It's very embarrassing if you made a huge issue of it among a lot of people and got a lot of people to agree with you, and now they are wrong just like you're wrong and you led them astray. See, this is a reality. This is a truth. This is a fact. You've all been wrong. You've all been wrong about something you were sure you were absolutely clear could never possibly be wrong. And you all know that this is very likely to happen again in the future. And we've also admitted that you could not see it coming. There was no way for you to know in advance what issue was going to be the one that you were wrong about. So what if it's the calendar that you're wrong about? What if it's the nature of the Godhead? What if it's whatever it is that you're fighting in the body about? What if that, oh no, I studied and wait a minute, didn't we just prove to you that that's irrelevant? because you did all of that, your due diligence about the last thing that you were wrong about. You're still wrong. So don't make a case saying, oh no, but I did and I did and I did. You did that before and you were still wrong. Where is the humility to realize and recognize that I might be wrong in something, no matter how much I'm sure, and because of that, I should have a lot more compassion, the fruit of the Spirit, gentleness, kindness, self-control, patience, and peace with my brother who disagrees with me. Is that making sense to people now? Because you have been and will continue to be wrong. And so you want to be really adamant and strong about how right you are, put it in a teaching that people can do whatever they want with, and then it's not personal. It's not something they can perceive as personal. In other words, you're not sitting one-on-one and trying to convince them. You threw it out there. If they listen to it and are convinced, great. If they're not, great. It's not something you now have personal responsibility about. It's when you really start pushing and badgering and pushing and badgering. Any of you ever been pushed and badgered by anybody on a particular spiritual concept? You don't have to raise your hands. Have you done that to anybody? We do that. We do that. It needs to stop if the body is going to come into unity. It's a huge, roadblock to unity. Is this behavior, this mindset. This is not the mindset of Yeshua. This is not the mindset of the Spirit. It also completely oversteps the scope of your license, so to speak. There are licensed professions, and everything that if you ever had a licensed profession, all of you who have anybody licensed professions, you've all had to been told somewhere in there to know the limitations of the scope of your license. One of the things that will get you in more trouble than anything else is when you step outside the limited scope of your license. That's why if someone calls me about something that may be legal, I tell them, I'm not an attorney, you need to talk to an attorney. Because guess what? As a rabbi, I don't have the license and qualifications to give legal advice. And so, as a person in the body, if you're not an anointed, appointed teacher, you don't have the license to teach. If you're not an anointed, appointed prophet, you don't have the license to prophesy. You understand what I'm saying? There's positions for you to do. And when I say teach, I don't mean like on a one-on-one where your family members, your children, whoever it is, you may be talking about something and you may teach something a little bit. Remember, I talk about the 4 levels, not the 4 levels of interpretation, but my 4 levels of what I expect you to get out of a teaching. Understanding, so you can do, so you can defend, so you can teach. Okay? So I want you to be able to teach this stuff, but that doesn't mean you're now a teacher. Only some people are teachers. Everybody should be able to teach a subject, but that doesn't make you a teacher. Understand the limited scope of your position. So let's bring this into the biggest part of it so we can wrap this up here. Most of what we try to do is his responsibility, not ours. In other words, it falls into the relationship of the Father or the Son. They must do the eye-opening, ear-opening, the heart-changing. They have to do the drawing. They have to do the instructing. We jump into their role. So forget that I know we're talking about these things like teacher and this and that. The biggest part of it is when you're stepping into their shoes. Stop that. You're not the Father and you're not the Son. There's only one of each, and they're very capable of doing their jobs. They don't need your help. They can do it themselves. They may give you a role to play, but be sure that they've actually given you the role to play. Am I making sense? Amen? Let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Father, we come before you, and we really want to understand ourselves. Because in understanding ourselves in the context of you and your Son, then we might understand how to finally come into unity, to come in a proper relationship. So, Father, we've all been wrong, and we need to understand how we can go forward, knowing that that is likely to happen again in the future in a way that is loving and joyful and patient and with the fruit of the Spirit and kind and gentle, etc., when we interact with people about things that we don't agree about. Because if we could come to that place, we would cause a whole lot less division. there'd be a whole lot less splintering and a whole lot more unity. So, Father, we want to thank you for showing us in your word, instructing us about us, giving us a mirror to reflect us back to us so we can understand ourselves and we can compare ourselves as we are to the self that we need to be, the one that's Yeshua-like, the one that's transformed and conformed into that image. So, Father, we just want to thank you for your mercy and your overflowing, abundant patience with your children who are as messy as we are, as challenging as we are, that you would love us so. So, Father, we know we're difficult. We know we're a challenge, but we also know that you love us and that you believe in us even more than maybe we believe in ourselves. So, Father, help us to be able to move forward, encourage us and strengthen us in this walk as we strive for unity instead of striving with each other. Father, we want to thank you now for this teaching. We ask that it would convict each one of us and cause us to apply immediately in our lives the parts of this teaching that need to be applied, starting right now, right this minute. So, Father, we thank you again. Submit ourselves to you in the authority, in the name of our soon-coming King, our high priest, our older brother, Yeshua of Nazareth. In his name we pray. Amen. Amen.